Thank you so much, James and Hilary and Heather. That was completely amazing. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I am going to ask you a few questions. I feel like I'm a quiz show host. It's quite exciting. So I am a parent. I'm probably not the only parent in the room. And obviously listening to you talk about brain development across infancy and childhood and adolescent, you're thinking, are there some take-home lessons for me here? Are there things that I should be doing differently to support my children's learning and their mental health and so on? So maybe I will ask you, James, to tell us what you think might be the practical implications for parents of new babies.
Ooh, well, that's a tough one. I think it's clear that the data from ourselves and from others show that attention to good nutrition in the early weeks and months after birth is really, really important. And that's often human breast milk. But beyond that, a healthy diet through the rest of infancy and early childhood impacts brain development and indeed the rest of the life course. So I think attention to diet would be one thing. I think that we, as parents and of children born at any gestation, we are aware of our own children's specific learning styles often. And I think we can, if you're a mother of a child who's had difficulties around the time of birth, it's possible that they might have a different learning style. And I would encourage parents in that situation to advocate for their child in the classroom. Go and talk to the teacher. Say, this is how my child learns best. And I think teachers are overwhelmingly receptive to this sort of educational partnership about nuanced learning. And I think I would also sort of take it back and say that if you were a prospective parent, then try your best pre-pregnancy to really work out where the stresses in your life are that can be fixed and try and fix them. And fourthly, I suppose, from the deprivation point of view, that is very important, and we can use our ballot papers to elect governments that we think prioritise these issues over other parties.
Great. That was a really very nice final point, particularly. Heather, what about you? Teenage years are another challenging time for parents, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything that we can do differently to support our teenagers?
I think we probably just need to be a bit more mindful that there's all these changes going on for them that are very important for them and their world, and that they're changes that they're not in control of. So I think we just need to be aware that sometimes these reactions are things that are outside their control, and that's what it's being expressed as. And we perhaps just need to be a little bit more patient with them. But I think also it's important to think on the flip side. And we know that the vast majority of people will come through teenage years and come out the other side flourishing. And that's really the vast majority. So it's important to, I think about that.
Yeah. Okay, so a combination of patience and sort of gritting your teeth until it's over.
Yes.
Okay. I'll remember that, because my kids are 11 and 12, so I'm sort of staring down the barrel of it right now. So we've all been talking about the ITACOM conference that's going to be here next year, and it's focused on neurodiversity. And so one sort of implication of the concept of neurodiversity is that the differences between people's brains are sort of naturally occurring, inevitable in the human race, if you like. So I wondered if you thought that any of your research supported that idea. Hilary, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll share an analogy, if it's okay, before I get to what my research says. But one analogy that I quite like is thinking about brains the way that we think about faces. So there's a lot of consistency across faces in what a face looks like and what it's made up of, eyes, nose, mouths, etc. But there's also a lot of variation in those features that make us who we are, right? We're recognized by our differences in our face, not the aspects that make us similar. So I think there's quite a nice analogy there between the way that we think about variation in faces and variation in brain structure. It makes sense that there's that variation that's inherent there. With my own research, I think that the deaf child study that I reviewed in my talk is of interest here. So in that study, the punchline is that while language experience is really quite important to provide to your child early on, the particulars of the language don't seem to matter, right? So the language that's best and most appropriate for your child, given their needs and abilities, is the one that's going to foster their development and allow them to make social connections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a nice example, isn't it? About that it's all about the match between the environment and the individual, right? James, you showed us the huge variety of babies' brains. What does that tell us about the concept of variability in brains?
Yeah, the extent took us by surprise, actually. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface now of the range of normal, for want of a better word. But what it's indicating to us is that there's a vast variability in how the brain has developed that underlies human existence. And until we can really define those bounds of normality that Heather spoke about as being important in the adolescent brain, until we can do that in the baby, it's difficult to define abnormal and therefore use imaging to its full potential of identifying those children early on who might benefit from early interventions. So, yeah, there's enormous variability underlying these functions, and identifying that is essential for making the most out of this technology.
Yeah, so they're all starting in a different place, and then there's all that developmental plasticity carrying on so much later than we ever realized, right? So there's just huge complexity here, isn't there? So in the face of that complexity, I would like you all to imagine that money is no object, time is no object, participants are queuing up outside your door. What would your dream research project look like? I will let Heather go first.
Well, I think tapping into that idea that we just don't know what normal is, I think we're several steps away from that. Because, as I said, the generally biased populations that we image at the moment. So I think that my funding would go towards widening the pool of people that we scan and being much more inclusive. Yeah, that's what I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Hilary?
Yeah, I am really fascinated by how the brain changes when we learn. So as a child who's undergoing, true conceptual change, true learning, understanding things in ways that they didn't see those things, in different ways than how they understood them before. I want to know what changes in the brain when that happens. And it's really hard to study. So, developmental psychologists have a few more tools than neuroscientists. They have the ability to do a training study, so actually teach a child something and then measure behavioral change. Or they can do what's called a microgenetic study, where they measure a child many, 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 many times. In neuroscience, the best we have is comparing one 3-year-old to a different 5-year-old, or if we're lucky, doing a longitudinal study and showing, getting one 3-year-old to come in and then 2 years later when they're 5. But I would, if money were no object, participants at the door, I would want something, either a training study or a microgenetic study, and actually try and, get those fine-grained measurements while the brain is changing.
Very cool.
Thanks.
What about you, James? What are you going to do with your £1 billion grant?
My gold pot.
Yeah.
I would really love to understand the biology of resilience and why some children do so well. The field has focused for the last 2 to 3 decades on injury and vulnerability factors, and it's only got us so far in understanding wellness and well-being. So I would want a big pot of money to be able to offer an MRI scan to every single newborn across the whole country, collect the rest of the data and follow them through their lives, and to be able to track and predict resilience more effectively. And then we can take those resilience factors and turn them into therapies for those who need it.
Oh, great. Well, I hope the Wellcome Trust are in the audience this evening. We're going to wrap up our part of the evening there, and I'm going to invite Sophie Dow to come up and say a few more words about the conference next year, and then Aaron will give us a farewell, and that will be us for the evening. Thank you, Sophie.
Hello. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, James. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you, Heather, for absolutely fascinating talks. I wrote down a lot, but I can't talk about it just now. I have to go home and think. But resilience, absolutely. And that's why Salvesen Mind Room is there. We work to help build that resilience. As Emily Dickinson wrote, the American poet, wrote in the late 1900s, the brain is wider than the sky. And that is so true. And today, approximately 135 years later, we still don't know much about the brain, do we? In fact, we know at best 10%, the experts say. And that, they say, is the big challenge of the 21st century, which to my mind is very exciting. It's a very exciting challenge, as there is a whole new continent to discover, which is the brain. And with that discovery, it will bring a much needed paradigm shift in how we look at and understand the brain, and a much more holistic approach that includes all kinds of minds, with an emphasis shifting from looking at what the child can't do to what he or she can do. Before I continue, I want to give our heartfelt thanks to the wonderful EICC, Europe's best conference center by far. Who are hosting this event tonight and next year's event or big conference. We, the Salvesen Mind Room Center and the Salvesen Mind Room Research Center, headed up by Sue, we couldn't ask for a more generous and accommodating collaborator. So in particular, thank you to CEO Marshall Dallas, who couldn't be here today, and an equally big thank you to Karen Webster and Aaron McKean, who are here today. Someone else who is also here this evening is Salvesen Mind Room's incoming CEO, Alan Thornborough. I can't really see you, but I know you're there. Alan comes to us from Alan comes to us from BITC, which is Business in the Community, the Prince's Responsible Business Network, where he advised businesses and government on sustainability and inclusion. But not only that, Alan is also an honorary professor of Glasgow School of Business and Society at GCU. He is a member of Young Scots Advisory Council and a member of the Scottish Government's National Suicide Prevention Leadership Group. Alan starts on Monday, and to say that we can't believe our luck is an understatement. I also want to say a collective get well soon to all those who have had to cancel tonight due to COVID. So, to round things off, well, if you think this evening's public lecture was fascinating and exciting, then come back for our big international conference. It takes all kinds of minds next year here at the EICC. It will be a hybrid conference, so if you can't attend in person, then you can attend digitally. We even have a special digital host to look after the digital delegates. Over 2 days, we will present you with the very latest thinking on the science and reality of neurodiversity. Our 50-plus speakers will include neuroscientists, nutritionists, campaigners, clinicians, actors, artists, activists, to mention just a few. Keynotes will include Professor Sue Gathercole, I pronounced that right, from the University of Cambridge, who is an expert in cognition and education, and Dr. Kathy Ledbetter from Manchester University. I almost said Manchester United. I'm not a Manchester United supporter. Who has pioneered work on neurodiversity-informed early intervention. And the earlier we can help, the better. There is a Swedish clinician and psychiatrist, Lotta Borg Skoglund, who will talk about her groundbreaking work with girls and women with ADHD and autism. And Scandinavian, he calls himself that because he's a Norwegian who lives in Sweden, Pelle Sandstrak is back by popular demand. He spoke at our previous conference in 2011. He's back by popular demand with his one-man show on living with Tourette syndrome. We will hear from a jewelry maker who specializes in anti-anxiety jewelry, and we will hear from an expert on the benefits of surfing and mental health, plus so much more. As you have gathered, we are here to make sure that no mind is left behind. We have just this evening, a few hours ago, 2 hours ago perhaps, just launched our Itacom website, itacom.org, and there you'll find all the information that you will need. Ticket sales open next week with super advantageous early bird offers and hefty discounts for students. But you can register your interest already now at the website, itacom.org. And we will send you an email when the metaphorical doors to the box office open. But now, from Sue and I, and James, and Hilary, and Heather, to all of you, thank you so much for coming, and see you again here in March next year, I hope.
Well, thank you, Sophie, and thanks again to Sue, James, Hilary, and Heather for what were absolutely fascinating talks. I'm sure everyone in attendance would agree. Now, here at the EICC, it's our mission to create an environment which inspires ideas that change the world. So I do hope that some of you here today have been inspired. Perhaps you can go home and think about what you're going to do with your £1 billion research grant. And I'd like to close the evening by extending our sincere thanks to the University of Edinburgh, Salves and Mind Room, the organisers of ITCOM 2023, and without whom none of this would have happened. So you can stay up to date with the EICC and future EICC live events by subscribing to our newsletter. Follow us on Twitter at EICC, and you can also watch the full event back for free in a few weeks' time on our YouTube channel, which is EICC Venue. And most importantly, thank you all for coming out tonight. EICC Live will be back in a few months' time, so please do stay tuned for something completely different. So thank you all.